What were your expectations for your podcast before you launched it? Or if it hasn't launched yet, where do you see it in 5 years' time? Our guest today didn't have high expectations for her podcast. She had a message to share, she had a microphone, and she had a list of dream guests. Now, Danusia Malina-Derben's podcasts, School for Mothers and School for Fathers, and her 10-year-old daughter's podcast, Seraphina Speaks, which Danusia produces, have achieved great success. She joins me on Podcasting Amplified to discuss how Danusia made her podcasts a success, why you should be going after bigger guests and how to approach them and get a response, how she grew her podcast on a shoestring budget, making your podcast more inclusive, the interview that Danusia didn't want to release and how she dealt with it, how to protect yourself as a podcaster, what it's been like for Danusia to produce her 10-year-old daughter's podcast and make it a success, and so much more. So listen carefully, because this conversation is packed with inspiration and actionable advice. Hi Danusia, welcome to Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Thanks very much for joining us on the podcast. So Danusia is the host of a couple of podcasts. She's the host of the School for Mothers and the School for Fathers podcasts, which disrupt the ideas that we hold as parents. And she's also the producer for Seraphina Speaks, which we'll talk about more throughout this episode. She speaks to celebrities, well-known authors, entrepreneurs, leading experts and all sorts, and she isn't afraid to tackle some big issues. And School for Mothers has been going for around 5 years now, I think it is. How did it all begin then? What was your thought process going into it, and why did you want to start this as a podcast?
Yeah, it was a madcap idea, if I'm being honest. It was, 5 years ago. Yes, there were some big podcasts, of course, we know that, and there were some that have been going on years. But for the ordinary person who isn't a professional audio, person, then actually it wasn't on their radar necessarily. So I think what I thought was, I've got zero experience of this, zero budget and zero listeners. Great combination. Let's go for it. Why not? I got myself some kit, didn't have a studio, and started making some recordings. Actually thought, what would I call it? So if I back up, I started out, I wanted to build a movement. What I really wanted to do was start to, as you said, Joe, disrupt the idea of what it means to be a mother. So I started with School for Mothers. And really, that's on the back of the fact that 5 years ago, I still am a mother of 10 children. And my day job, podcasting isn't my day job. My day job is working in boardrooms, consulting, and talking about major corporations, giants that we'll all know, with on human capital and really performance, so high performance. So juggling having a brood of children and my day job and my own ambitions, well, that's quite unwieldy. And I was sick of hearing everywhere for years, that's impossible. So I wanted to disrupt that notion. What's the underlying notion about this? Subsequently, I wrote a book on it. But the fact is, 5 years ago, I thought, I know loads of really interesting women that are doing incredible things in the world, change-making things. Yet, day in, day out, the media is telling us, stay at home or don't have children, or maybe have one. Or, there were lots of narratives. So I didn't have any experience at all in podcasting, at all.
No.
That was my thinking. Why not?
What kind of vision did you have for the podcast 5 years ago? Does it look anything like what it's become today?
Well, that's a great question, Joe. Yeah. I did not know if there would be anybody that would listen.
Okay.
I did not know if anybody would find it enjoyable. I didn't know if I had any of the skills to do it, as in I do, I connect with people. I connect with large egos actually on a daily basis. And so I know that I can connect. That wasn't a worry, but that's different. Could I actually make content that would keep people listening? For a start, would my voice turn them off? All sorts of things that ran through my head. So does it look anything like I thought? My thoughts were very low. I had very low expectations of what might happen. That was lucky. That's really lucky, because going in with that idea rather than a grand plan meant that I was deeply grateful when I realized that actually this was hitting a spot. I believe that we were 6 months in when we toppled Tim Ferriss off the top. Absolutely. Not forever, clearly. For a few weeks. I think it might have been a little while, definitely a month. And I realized then, we're hitting a nerve here. So I had to adjust my expectations of, okay, actually, we're getting a lot of downloads here. We're hitting that nerve that women are desperate to hear other people's stories. And one thing I would say, Joe, that as much as I had low expectations about what it might look like and the end results, it was more about the process. I do have very large ovaries. And what I mean by that is typically we might say balls, but I'm going to say ovaries.
Yeah? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, because I didn't think, shall I get my best mate on the show? She'll have a nice conversation. We can have a bit of a chat.
Yeah.
No, very quickly I thought, I drew up lists. I'm a very strategic person. And I thought, here's my list of people that I want, globally. Who would I want? And then went for them.
Why not?
En masse. Why not? So it's very much, why not? Why couldn't I do that? Who's telling me I can't? Which, of course, ultimately is behind the idea of, I guess, it's not all built on it, but the attitude towards having 10 children and maintaining a successful career, actually, that chutzpah to say, yeah, this is going to be tough. It's not going to be a smooth ride. Of course it's not. But why not? Because otherwise, what's the alternative? Very deeply personal choice, that one. I'm not suggesting other people should follow it at all. So I held very big ambitions for the kinds of guests that I would have. And that's done me proud. I also did not send out questions in advance. Like, here's the 6 questions we'll ask, as in we'll definitely ask. Get yourself ready for that. I did not do that. Did I adjust that for famous people, MPs? No, I didn't. No, I haven't. I've had publicists ask for, nope, she won't come on unless, you tell us exactly what you're going to say. And I'll give them a ballpark. We're going to cover this. I had a theme. I'm talking in past tense, as we'll come on to in a minute. Each episode, I decided that I rather like one-word syllables.
Yes.
So, it had some kind of hook. So I could say, we are going to talk plonk, for instance. I was talking to a best-selling author, Claire Pooley, about becoming sober, her journey of what that was like. And so, yes, I added in along the way Sunday supplements. I realized that weekly interviews were fantastic. We were garnering great downloads, but actually I realized that there was a call for more practical content. So I, every other week, decided, well, we'll do something practical. Yeah. So blended the kind of content that we did that did marvelous things for downloads and getting it out there in the world. So I think there's this whole thing about the cadence of publishing. How often do you publish? once a month, once a fortnight, once a week, daily. What is it that you're going to be able to manage and sustain? I think that was the thing. What can you sustain? And remember, this wasn't my day job. Wasn't my day job at all. So I was running big consultancy projects whilst on the side at night or in the day, but, as a night job, also doing this. And podcasting is, how do you find it? It's a vast job, isn't it?
Yeah. And like you say, the consistency is such a big aspect.
Yeah.
And if you kind of overstretch yourself at the beginning, you say, right, I'm going to do an episode every single week, and then realize that you can't. It doesn't look as good if you go back down to 1 or 2 a month, compared to if you sort of increase the number of episodes you're putting out.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard not to feel that that's a deficiency model, rather than if you're backing off, rather than actually growing it and allowing it to evolve is a sensible, logical way to do it. And I think that the danger is that we get so excited when we realize we've got, more than a few listeners, that we can then overstretch too much. And I was careful. Actually, I also had a team. I hired a very small team. I'm very proud. One of the young men that joined as a podcast assistant, he's now in his final year of his PhD on podcasting at Cardiff University.
Oh, okay.
He loved it so much. A deeply bright guy, young. And so I was really lucky to hire key people, because getting in guests at the level I was punting for, and I'm putting it like that very deliberately, actually takes time. So it takes to build a guest management system, I think, to keep on top of when did you write? Do you need to nudge them? How do you need to get round, kind of make a connection with this guest? Because it's so important to not just bang out, copy and paste, cut and paste, like, hey, we'd love you on the podcast. No, that's not going to get their attention. Not if you're going for world famous people, high caliber experts in their field that are inundated with requests. How do you cut through that? Well, it's by personalizing. So that takes time. It takes research. It takes a bit of ingenuity, I think. And I happen to see that as a game, as a puzzle. I gamify things, I don't see that as a chore. So that's how the podcast got from being zero anything to people actually coming to us, coming and saying, hey, could we actually come on? We'd really like to. Our person would love to be on, as opposed to me clambering for people. That's a nice place to be.
Yeah. So your ambitions for it, your position as a mother of 10, getting on the being ambitious with your guests, staying consistent, all built up to the progress it's made.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of a particular sort of guest reach out that stick in your mind, like a really sort of big win that took a bit of research and took some of this ingenuity?
Well, I've got 2 short ones. Selling Sunset. Do you watch it?
No, I know of it.
It's a Netflix series, and I'm going to confess that the name of the guest is going to go out of my head in such an inconvenient moment. Doesn't matter, because I'm not actually trying to get your listeners to go on over and listen. It's fine. No, it's more the concept of what happened.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, I was actually watching it, and I don't watch it normally, but for some reason, I think one of my teenage daughters had it on, and it's fun. It's great fun. looking around luxury homes in Los Angeles. What's not to love, really? And the personalities, the dynamics of the team, the Oppenheim team. And I thought, I wonder if I could find an email for one of them. I wonder if the mothers. So I quick tippity tap, looking around, which one's a mother? And I find that one of them is a mother. And I bang off as I'm watching it, hey, you have no idea who I am. Let's recognize that right away. You don't know me at all. We've never met. We probably won't, in real life. I do this. I adore what you're doing. Obviously, watching how she is, because I was watching. Yeah, is there any chance in hell that you'd actually come on? It was slightly differently worded, but it was that kind of, it was quite throwaway, actually, because we usually do some deeper research. I woke up the next day to a personal email from her, not an assistant, saying, love to come on. When shall we do it? That was that. I was like, wow, lesson there. You can go for things.
Yeah.
If you can find an email, go for it. Or if you can construct the email that you think they might have, that's the other tip. What might they have?
Yeah.
Think. Yeah. And secondly, Erica Jong, she's in her 80s, second wave feminist, mother of grand dame, actually, of feminist erotica. And just a marvelous character and a best-selling author, obviously. Very famous in the States. Doesn't give interviews. Doesn't want to talk. I didn't read the books, but I read reviews. I read reviews of her books. And I read reviews about her daughter, Molly, who's highly political. And I read reviews about their relationship. And so when I pitched, I referred to personal things that I know that she believes in. I didn't trade my own beliefs. I didn't pretend. I just named things that I knew in a way that showed her, I know a bit about you. I appreciate who you might be and what you've done in life. And Erica unbelievably said yes. And I was so shocked because she really does rarely give these interviews. And she can be a handful. I'll just put it that way, if she does. She was a pussycat. She was absolutely wonderful. To the point where I had to stop her when she started describing her sex life. I was like, Erica, it's okay. You don't need to go there. Because, of course, what she was really saying was that she's actually the exact opposite of the characters that she was writing about, which was a fascinating insight into who she is. Yeah, so she was writing this, kind of lusty set of novels that were groundbreaking. They were written many years ago. But actually, she's not that woman at all, which was why she was letting me into that. And which was wonderful to hear. For women, that was very important. Not about the sexuality. It was about you can be an introvert, for instance. She's actually quite introverted. Introvert, but you can have great success in the world. You do not need to be this loud person that goes out there. There are many shades of success. And that was precious. I was very grateful to her. Yeah, very grateful.
That's really inspiring. And I hope it will be for the listener as well. Just that, what's the worst that could happen? Especially when you don't even know these people. They're not in your sort of field anyway. Like, they'll just ignore the message. Or they'll, you might get a no, but that's really about it. So it's worth reaching out, and you must have made a connection with her for her to speak that sort of, about private life and things. And Yeah, I mean, you do see sort of a device in finding guests, and it will have, templated scripts and stuff to send out. And yeah, if you want to get a guest like that, then if you can make a connection with someone and they can see you as a human being rather than an email, or a mailing list or whatever, then yeah.
We have to remember that these people truly are inundated with requests, and we have to go with an angle that is sufficiently different for them not to go, oh, they just want to know about that. Because actually, when we have a guest on, they're doing us a favor.
Yes.
They're giving us their time to us, and they're sharing who they are. There has to be something that means that they want to go through, they want to do it more than they've been taught to just give the media spiel. And I think that's it. There's the media story, there's the narrative, the arc that most people have. And so what is it that will have them break out of that? And I'm interested in that. That's why it's a disruptive podcast, because I don't want to hear your normal, like, oh, I did this, then I did that, then I did this. I'm like, please, that's yawn-worthy. You said that on another podcast. I could go listen to that podcast, you know, and that's not me being rude about that person. It's just that we're actually taught to do that. Yeah. I want to scratch beneath that. And actually, I haven't talked in this way on other podcasts, for instance. I'm not doing that myself here. I don't always go behind the scenes on how we've managed to get very, famous people. Yeah. One of them is, scraping for emails. How do you do that? What software can you use? And we've used a few softwares, obviously, pieces of software, obviously, always with an eye on cost effectiveness. I haven't had a massive budget of, oh, money's no object. No, not at all. This was on a shoestring. The same as hiring people. It's not that I had massive budget and I had to get, again, creative. That's how I ended up with Max, who was actually as a triplet. I have triplets. So he was, I know his mother, who is an author, and she was like, he's into podcasts. I wonder if he'd like to do this. At university, very critically thinking chap, very clever. So it suited him, and I was able to pay him enough. It's not about cutting people down price wise. No. I paid him well. But yeah, I couldn't afford a professional producer I couldn't do that at the time. So yeah. Yeah,
I think that's definitely relatable. I mean, podcasting is certainly not something to go into if you're looking to make money directly from the podcast, unless you're using it as a way of marketing and you've got a budget behind it and things.
I think that's a really good point, because the whole idea of what is it you're going into it for? Is it to build a platform? Is it to build, is it a lead generation tool? What is it? What are you doing with it? Is it a hobby? And there's nothing wrong with having a hobby. No. That's what you want, if you enjoy it. But for me, I wanted to create a movement. And also I wanted I had multiple agendas eventually, but I'd be lying if I said I did at the beginning. I didn't at all. I let it unfold.
Did the podcast lead on to the books that you've written, the two books, Noise and Spunk?
Yes, I already had a book deal, and I was jostling within myself about whether I wanted the framework of that book deal. And the book deal, in fact, I have two on the table for the motherhood book, and each publisher wanted me to write a book on a how-to book, career and kids.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to do that. And that's what I didn't do. So I, because as part of a book proposal, of course, there is the platform, who follows you, how many people in your email list. So it's all about credentials, credibility, authority. And I realized that as much as I had a following, I couldn't quantify it as much as I wanted. The podcast helped a great deal.
Mm.
Didn't take those book deals on, but a third one came on the table, which was to write noise. And that's the critical underpinnings of what are the narratives that are just taken for granted narratives, as if we mustn't question them. Like if you think about mothers are always going to be guilty. It's just a given, you're always going to be guilty when you're a mother. I wanted to look at that and go, is that so? Is that right? Let's take that apart, disassemble that myth of motherhood. Is it a myth or is it a given? So before I ever get on to, okay, now we've looked at the foundations of motherhood and the motherhood identity, now we can look at how to. Because if I'd gone on to how to stop being guilty, that assumes it actually is a central component. Or have we been sold this as an idea? Yeah. So it's, I'm an ex-academic, so I'm not sure you can ever be an ex-academic. That's where my brain is. So I was very pleased that certainly School for Mothers helped in terms of being able to critically look at motherhood identity, as opposed to jump forward onto the how to do it type of somewhat shallower approach. And of course it has its place, and I may well do that. We'll see. The fatherhood one came from School for Fathers, which I set up 2 years in after School for Mothers was on its feet. And I could see, okay, well, this is very interesting. I wonder what it would be like if I spoke to men. Because parenthood is, as you obviously know, not all about mothers. And I wanted to speak to fathers about how they're finding being fathers and their careers, their working, fatherhood and work. And I can't remember how many, maybe 130 interviews for that. I may have that figure wrong, but it's certainly over 100. And that was an interesting, I loved it. I absolutely love those interviews. What I found was very interesting is that the tactics that we deployed in guesting and actually all of the, setting up interviews were very different with men. I had not anticipated that it would be different.
No. Different how?
So women were responsive in a way that I didn't find men as responsive in terms of invitations. And I'm talking about everybody. I mean, again, I did not dull my ambition. Didn't dial down my ambition with the men. I'm just the same person. And it's not that I didn't get responses. It's just that their responsiveness was slower. So I had to think about, okay, whereas with a woman, it might take 3 weeks to sort something. With a man, I'd have to build in 9 weeks to 12 weeks. So our lead-in time was different. And just cutting straight to it, I'd say our communication was way more direct. Come on the podcast, yes or no. Not quite as bold as that. I'm obviously exaggerating. Whereas the connection piece was, and I'm being incredibly gendered about this, and I'm aware of it, but linguistically, the response was better when there was less padding around things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's very, very insightful for people, whether their ideal listeners are men or women, and it's just your experience. So whether you're being gendered about it or not, that's still important.
yeah, that's my experience and my observation of it. And so we then began to adjust our approaches, and they began to be more successful, therefore, with the men, because we obviously looked, right, it's working over here, we'll bring it over there then. Wow, okay. Oh, how interesting. Wow. So and as I say, our team was not made up of women. It was, and not made up of, I ought to mention this because it's really important to me as a host. One of the things that I have is a commitment to building in true diversity. So if I would be, I tasked myself and our team with being really clear about our diversity, not quotas. We didn't have quotas, but how many white middle-class women have we had? Come on, this is getting, this is no. Is everyone heterosexual? Are they all married with a working husband? Are they, etc.? You get the gist. And we did that also with School for Fathers. So it was really, really important to make sure that we were giving voice to a wide range of people on a wide range of topics.
Yeah, that's very important. And I think some podcasters don't consider that.
The other day, I was sent a link on WhatsApp from a friend who said, "Oh, you've got to look at Lex Friedman."
Yes.
Danusia, you've got to go and look at this. Listen to it, in other words. And I did. And immediately, before I even clicked onto that, I had a quick scan of all of his visuals, and I went, these are all midlife, being generous, midlife men. Majority, and I do mean probably 95%, white men. So it's white men of a certain age.
Yeah.
And immediately I think, why is that? Is that a message? Because obviously he's talking to groundbreaking thought leaders in the world, businessmen who are making huge strides in their area of expertise and industry. And they're all men. What is that messaging saying? Because I just did a visual impact. It was like, whoa, okay. So there's no women? No black and brown human beings with anything that's happening in the world? It's a very critical point. It really is. So on top of being ambitious, it's also about how do we want to change the landscape in podcasting, or in fact, do we only want to talk about, or only want to hear from certain people? Is that what we want? And that might be fine too, if that's what you want. So just get really clear about it.
Yeah, and what kind of listenership do you want? The kind that would not want a diverse group of guests? Maybe not.
Yeah.
And speaking of guests, just wanted to speak about the Katie Hopkins episode that you recorded. She was one of your guests, and for people who don't know who she is, maybe particularly outside the UK, she's a media personality, columnist. She was on The Apprentice. She's known for quite inflammatory far-right views. And I imagine that was quite a challenging interview. I mean, I would find it challenging, I think. But also you had to make the decision of whether or not to release the episode as you normally would. And in doing so, I guess, give her the airtime. You also had to deal with challenges of people questioning why you're interviewing her. And I think I listened to that episode, and I think the way you did it was really good. The way you could have chopped it up and used the best bit, so to speak. And what was that experience like? And have I sort of missed anything off in that description of the event?
You've done a great job. Well, if we remember what I just said earlier about drawing up lists in a very strategic fashion of ambitious, my ambitions of who do I want on? Well, I equally drew up a list of who do I not want on. It was a very tiny list, because actually there aren't many people that I think, oh no, I'd rather not to speak with you, because I like to hold an open mind. Katie was a challenge on that, and she was number one on my list. It was very easy for me to think, oh, I really don't want Katie on School for Mothers.
Yeah.
I just don't. It's a turn off. She's not a turn off. I think she's a very interesting human being. I really do. But I just didn't want the challenge. Yeah, I didn't want to take it up, the mantle. Given my personality, the minute I clocked, right, I see. So you're dodging that bullet, are you? You absolute pansy. That's how I felt inside. And I'm perfectly fine to be like, yes, I'm dodging it. But actually, I thought, okay, let's go on. Let's invite her. Because I was pretty damn sure that she wouldn't come on. Of course, I had to pick myself up when I got a really lovely email from her saying, love to come on, Danusia. I was like, oh no, what have I done?
Open Pandora's box.
Yeah, well, that was my problem. We did record, as you say, we recorded the interview, and I believe then it really hit me that what was I going to do with it? Oh. And it's a really rare interview in my experience of being a host, because prior to every other recording, because my job is to highlight and showcase people. Yeah. My job is not to get into argument with them and try and shape their views I don't do all that. Yeah. No, I'm interested in them. And I do what I said earlier, which is dig below the general stuff that they're asked. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear something different. And that comes from being curious about them. I wasn't curious about Katie. And in fact, I'm deeply curious about her, but I didn't want her to offer her deeply offensive views. I wanted to make sure that we didn't have much, if any, ridicule of certain sections of the community of society that I know will be listening. Yeah. So I did give her a pep talk before we actually started recording. Okay. I can only say it was a pep talk. Like, Katie, don't do this one. We're not having that one. We're not having this. This is not how I am, but I did it. And was I nervous? Yes, I was nervous. Of course I was nervous. I knew that at some point she would to hook me into an argument that then could go anywhere. Yeah. So I was on high alert. And also curious about her. She's a human being. Yeah. Just like everyone else. And yes, yeah. So I also wanted to have my heart open. It's quite a job. So I didn't publish it. I decided that given the good progress of School for Mothers, which had gone way beyond my initial thoughts, why would I damage it? I took some advice, and every person said, from journalists, from podcasters, they were like, oh, I should just leave that on the shelf if I were you, Danusia. Pretend that never happened. Which is what I did. And I thought about it. I thought about, what does that say? What does that say about me as a host? I'm actually not amplifying all voices. I'm committed to diversity, but where does my line get drawn? All sorts of personal thoughts, but also wider thoughts about freedom of speech, cancel culture, etc., etc. So, as you've just said, I did publish, but I didn't publish the entire 1 an hour, whatever it was, conversation. It's a commentary on why I was too afraid to publish it. That actually allows me to take a process view on, to take a wider view on what's the status of freedom of speech. Who gets to have the right to speak these days? And the dilemmas that as a podcast host that caused and does cause us all the time. What if someone is, in our view, obnoxious? If their messages are obnoxious, do they have a right to be out there or not? So I used it as a vehicle for that. And I also do not, the clips, the chunks of the interview that I use are not necessarily the ones where I look great. Of course they're not. I mean, there's a point at which I say, well, listen for the way my voice changes, because I suddenly because she was rattling me, because she did exactly what I thought she'd do, which is attempt to get me engaged in a really come on, bite, girl, come on.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't bite. So when I wouldn't bite, she started, giving me unsolicited feedback about who I am as a human, as a person, the kind of woman I am. And even when I wouldn't bite on that, she kept going. And that took a lot, because nobody likes to be insulted. Yeah. And I certainly didn't want to insult her. So I've had enormously fantastic feedback. I thought that I may well lose a lot of listeners. And as Katie warned me, I would get hate mail. I got not one, touch wood, not one to this date. I've only got amazingly supportive thanks that I aired my views around why it was so difficult and what we need as an industry. Yeah. So it's actually been great. Is it the most downloaded episode? Yes. Yes. It is.
Wow.
But it's not the most downloaded episode because it's an hour of me talking to Katie Hopkins. It's not.
No.
It's me saying why I didn't. And here's bits of it, and I'll show you why I didn't. Yeah. And I don't call, as you know, I don't call her names. I don't stand beside her views. I really don't. I can't.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even without the download success of it, just the fact that you're able to put this sort of unique perspective, I don't think I've heard a podcast episode where, I mean, I've heard of podcasters who have had to not publish episodes because an interview turned out a way that they didn't expect it to. But the fact that you knew that it would be a challenge, and even just getting that out of it, just stepping into something challenging is something to get out of it as well.
Yeah. Well, from perspective of me as a host, I grew enormously by facing it. One, in the process of actually having that conversation with her in the first place. I ruminated over it far too long. I've thought more about that podcast episode than any episode. So she triggered deep thought within me and for my listeners, or the listeners. And actually, so I'm grateful to her. I'm grateful that there are people in the world that trigger thought. Do I agree? No. But I'm sure we could find agreement. Just so you know, we had a great interview. So there were spaces where it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because what my experience of that was that the minute that I was that we made those connections, it was time for Katie to come in ready for the bite. When we think about marketing our episodes, I was acutely aware that if I did that, I could have written to her and said, hey, Katie, here's the episode, which I would normally do.
Yeah.
Have I? No, I haven't. No. Did she sign a waiver? Mm-hmm. Yes. Did I look that up, make sure I had it? Yes. Did I think about the legals on this? Absolutely. Yeah. So all those things are really important to have that in your mind if you're going to be bold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely something for people to think about who are maybe, after listening to this, considering approaching some sort of bigger guests, so to speak.
It's not actually, if I can just add something on, it's not just bigger guests. I was talking to somebody the other day who has a podcast on trauma and abuse. So around, healing that. And they'd interviewed somebody and they'd talked not by name about their family, not named people, but they talked about incidences. Those family members listened and then came to the host and said that they would take legal action if she didn't take it down. So there are some interesting, I think there's some very, I don't know if it's interesting or just get your legals in place. Think about that. Are you getting people to sign that it's yours, that you can distribute in any fashion as you move forward? Yeah. So there's no time limit on mine. So it's not that Katie could come and say, well, you didn't put it out in a year. It's not yours anymore. Well, it is. Actually, it is. I can take clips. I can, and I can continue to do that. But what do you do if you have a taboo subject or a sensitive subject that you are producing content on? How can you protect you and your guests if that's the case?
Yeah, thank you for that, because it is something that I think a lot of podcasters probably don't think about. I've got a couple more questions, 2 more things to cover if you have time.
I do have time, yeah.
Thank you.
I rarely talk this much.
No, I mean, I could definitely fill another hour, I think, with things I want to ask you. But the 2 things that I really want to ask, firstly, so you've hosted those 2 podcasts, but you also produce Seraphina Speaks, your daughter's podcast. And she is 10 years old. And we spoke about before. Did you say it was 5 other podcasts in the world that you know of hosted by children?
It changes, because children obviously stop. But
yes.
I mean, they just
ones.
I would say let's be generous. If there's 2 handfuls, if there's 10, we'll be lucky. And what I mean by that is children that are solo hosts, not with a parent or an adult beside them. Yeah.
I'm
talking about totally solo run, hosted, as in hosted podcasts. There's very, very few.
And not only that, but she's tackling issues which people might not expect a child content creator to tackle. Would you mind giving a brief overview of what you'd spoken about before, about sort of what the podcast is, and I guess how it came about, what inspired her to create it, and sort of your role in the podcast as the producer?
Yeah, of course. Seraphina, in those early days when I set School for Mothers up, she would sit on the bed, because it was in my bedroom on a desk that I would record. She would sit on the bed, kind of having been told, don't say a word, Seraphina. Try and keep quiet. Because she knew I was recording. Now, obviously, we could edit that. But actually, She was fantastic. She'd sit there, zipped mouth, but just sit there and listen. And one day when she was 6, out of the blue, she said, Mama, you have a podcast. And it was simple as that. And as I was on the tip of my tongue to say no, when I stopped myself and thought, why can't she have one? She could, because she used to sit and, with my mic, and she'd play. And I was like, I could let her just record. There's no reason. So anyway, all this was very fast in my head. And I just said, yes, of course you could have a podcast, darling. Of course you can. And that's where it grew from. So she started saying, if she said something, it was a natural thing. It's not that we sat and had a meeting about, now, what are you going to podcast on? No, nothing like that. She would just come home from school, things like toys. She'd say, why do boys get that? But I get this. She is a triplet, 2 boys and a girl. So she has direct comparison beside her. Yeah. And she started looking at life, looking at, why is it like it is? Like a lot of children, just critically thinking about, curious about why life's like it is. And that's where it grew from. So we started saying, I was led by her when she would say, I think I could do an episode on X. I'd say, okay, let's jot that down. She'd make a voice note in my iPhone. She'd very, very, it was fun, still is, fun, very informal, no pressure. If you don't want to do this, she was like, why? I want to do this. So I've been totally led by her. She took a year off. She came back in September, but she took a year off. She said, she's home educated. I need to get my home education more set. I want to focus on that. I was like, cool, great. Just have a sabbatical. May not come back to it. It's perfectly fine. So it's a family-friendly show ostensibly for tweens and teens. And she examines ordinary everyday things and why they are like they are. Anything from things I don't care about was a recent one.
Yes.
And she's talking about that habit when somebody that is passionate about something talks to you, bends your ear for 10 minutes because they love it, but you don't care about it. So one of her brothers is into flags. He knows everything about flags in the world, and she has to listen all the time about that. So she came up with this because she realized that if you love someone, you just kind of listen because, well, why not? You love them. So she's talking about that thing and sayings that adult sayings that make no sense. So she's talking about idioms, where they come from. So there's always an informative, educational piece of whatever she does. So she teaches her listeners something, a background piece about something. And then she has a strong opinion about it, a strong opinion that isn't like, this is the way it is. It's more thought-provoking about, well, this is me, but how about you? Where are you with this? So it's garnered a great deal of, or she has garnered a great deal of adult following. Grown-ups love this podcast. They don't just bring their children to listen to it, and schools are listening. So it's used in a lot of conversation starters in classes. But actually, she receives a lot of email from adults thanking her. Because so she does 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off, and she explains why. So one of the things she said was, the thing is, why would I keep doing this on a weekly basis? Then I'd end up being a 35-year-old burnt out person. When actually, if I just knew that I would do 8 weeks recording and then you'll wait another 8 weeks, then I'll bring you some more. That means I've got a life balance. So that's why adults are like, yeah, you've got a point there, girl.
Sounds like my son arguing for 5 days at school, 5 days a weekend.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Seraphina. So that's one of the things she's done. She's getting correspondence from around the world to also on every subject, like, do you wear underwear under pajamas? That was one of them. This notion of, who wears underwear under pajamas and why? So it's not just take Seraphina's word for it. She goes out and gets correspondence to get clips. So that's what she's doing. And then she took on M&S because they only sell sleep knickers to women. And she wants to know why. Why? What's that about? Why girls and women? She can think of some reasons, but actually she's like, look at the language in your advert, M&S. Playful. Why do I need playful pants at night? And they're identical to your men's pants, but you say practical for men. Yeah. So she's picking up those things. Obviously, she lives in a house where we talk about these things.
Yeah.
So it's on her radar. So she is loving it. She's got a new season out coming in January, and she's looking at lying, as in on lying.
Yeah.
Pockets, Disney. She's pretty sick of Disney.
Okay.
And the messaging in Disney. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she has a Disney expert coming on.
Wow.
It's fun. It's great fun. From a production point of view, Seraphina is profoundly dyslexic, ADHD. From an actual production perspective, it can be tough. It's really tough. So she can't read a script. Not that I would ever suggest you necessarily read a script anyway. But she can't. There's many things that she can't do in the pre-production stage, the kind of production piece. That her brothers who aren't dyslexic could. So we have to make together. We have to do lots of accommodations. So just the recording itself is quite heavyweight for our editor. Yeah. So I think that's one of the interesting things for me about producing it. It's completely different, not being the host, obviously. I guess I could have jumped in and tried to host it with her, but why would I? That'll be a shame. Change it completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she won an award at 8, a US award for Seraphina Speaks.
Wow.
She loves ribbing me that I haven't won an award, but she has.
Got some competition. Yeah.
No, she just likes telling me. It's not even a competition, because I actually say to her, I don't even go for any awards.
Yeah.
Of course I don't. That's actually not what I'm about. But she likes to say, we both have podcasts, but Mummy hasn't won an award. I have. And I like, yay, that's my girl. She has a Substack. She's got her own Substack, Seraphina Speaks. She's this is what she wants to do.
Yeah. That's
at
fascinating.
This point in her life.
Yeah.
At this point in her life. So yeah.
I can see, how it could be very fascinating for adults as well as children. Like hearing from the perspective of a 10-year-old, I haven't heard anything quite like it in the podcasting space. So I can see why it's popular, but I'm definitely going to have a listen to
I think
some of these
one of the
episodes you
things
mentioned.
that we talked about earlier was that this whole family space in podcasts is an expanding genre. And And the fact is, from a brand advertising perspective, you're not just getting the children, it's the parents. So traditionally and historically, parents have facilitated their children's listening. And recently, the research on this has suggested that listeners would be happy to listen to very branded podcasts. And that includes children. So there's a whole space here for garnering sponsorship from brands in that particular genre. And in fact, that's what Seraphina and I will be going out very soon, having got the base of the podcast nice and stable. We'll be going out for, advertisers pretty soon.
And then finally, what's next for you, for School for Mothers? Because am I right in saying you're releasing a sort of rebranded or new podcast?
Yeah, it's a rebranded one. So typically, I took some advice from Tink Media. If anybody doesn't know Tink, it's a fantastic company in New York, consultancy. And they usually advise that someone just starts a new one. But in my case, what they said was, no, don't do that. Change the cover art, keep the RSS feed, and, change the name. So that's what we're doing. So early 2024, a newly named School for Mothers will be out, called Parents Who Think. It's a debate show. So it's I don't believe, although if anyone knows of anything like this, let me know. But in the family, lifestyle, parenting arena, I don't believe that there is another debate podcast. Yeah.
Perhaps some people don't want to tackle it from that angle. They don't want to.
It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're starting out with is having a favorite child okay?
Yeah.
Can you love your stepchildren like your own? Should sexual identity and gender orientation be taught in schools? I mean, we're kind of walking into the difficult subjects. Yeah,
and
that's what I'm going to be hosting.
Ask, yeah.
Brilliant. The things that we're actually asking of ourselves as parents, what do are we raising mollycoddle kids?
Mm-hmm.
Are we equipping our children with what they need actually to be independent citizens with our softly ways? Yeah. Is peaceful parenting, for instance, setting our children up or not? And these are difficult debates to have, and people feel very strongly about them, and it's dangerous territory for me, Joe. I've got 10 children, so obviously I'm thinking about these things. I am. And it's got the edge to it that I now need to move on to. It really has. So I look forward to that. And in fact, in the Is Having a Favorite Child episode, is it okay to have a favorite child? I have at least 3 of my children, probably 4. 3 are already recorded. One's messing about. She wants to do it, but she just hasn't done it yet. On their perspective on either being the favorite, 3 of them are sure they're the favorite, and one of them is not. She's sure she's not.
All right.
Mm-hmm. So you will hear from my children on that one. So that's a pretty exposing thing. But hey, they wanted to do it. They were like, "Oh, I'm definitely the favorite." They're hilarious.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So for parents, any parents, it sounds like this could be something really worth listening to, and that's on the feed for the School for Mothers. So that's right, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah,
just go and if you subscribe to School for Mothers right now, you'll just instantly get Parents Who Think when it comes out, which that's probably the best way rather than hanging around waiting.
Is there a date for that? Sorry.
Yeah, it's the third. I think it's the third week of January. So it's the back end of January. We've got to get over Christmas, get
and
back
then,
into work.
Yes. And then while people are waiting, they've got a whole back catalogue of School for Mothers and School for Fathers episodes.
Yeah. I'm no longer recording on School for Fathers, but there's hundreds in there. It's great. But, there's some, it maintains its position, every day. It's perfectly fine. But there's some fantastic ones in there, depending on what you want to listen about. There's lots. Yeah.
And is there any other way that people can reach out to you if they think they might be a good guest on the podcast, or if they just want to know more about what you do?
Well, if you think you'd be a good guest on the Parents Who Think one, if there's a burning debate in your head, you think, oh my gosh, she needs to do this debate, then write at team@parentswhothink.co.uk. Do that one. And then if you look up the snappily titled Danusia Malina-Derben, obviously my name, danusiamalina-derben.com, you'll find me. My email's there.
Cool. Yeah. I'll leave it there. Leave the links in the show notes.
Or come connect on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. So yeah, come and find me there and send me an email. Send me a message. Yeah. And if there's anything that I've said that you'd like to, ask me about your own podcast that's triggered a thought, then I'm happy to answer questions and I'm happy to help and support people. I do that a lot. So, yeah. Yeah,
it was really insightful and I really appreciate giving us all this time.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry it's been quite a long time.
No, it's brilliant.
But I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And I'm kind of in the market for a parenting podcast. I read a couple of books, but for some reason I haven't found the right sort of parenting podcast. But I think getting in like from the ground running on the first episode is always a nice thing. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for Parents Who Think.
That'll be lovely. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. At least we'd have one listener. Right? No, it's all right. Luckily, we will have a lot more.
Yeah,
but thank you. That would be lovely to have you there. Great.
Thanks, Danusia. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.